Thank you. I'm gonna put my phone here. Yep. Now, thanks a lot for having me here. I have to say that I'm a bit stressed about this talk because normally I'm giving talks in urban planning conferences, surrounded by urban planners, and I looked at the participants in this festival, and they all seem super cool, creative, filmmakers, journalists. So I thought, okay, how am I going to tell my story? And I thought I'm going to bring some people to help me. I hope they are cool enough for you. And I'm going to start with Humphrey Bogart. So, do you know him? Okay, we're going to start with a scene.
It might be a good idea for you to disappear from Casablanca for a while. There's a free French garrison over at Brazzaville. I could be induced to arrange a passage.
My letter of transit? I could use a trip. But it doesn't make any difference about our bet. You still owe me 10,000 francs.
And that 10,000 francs should pay our expenses.
Our expenses? Mm-hmm. Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Now, Humphrey Bogart was an actor, probably the biggest movie star in the 40s. He played in Casablanca. He acted in Casablanca, which is an amazing film, still considered as one of the best films in history. But as you noticed in the beginning of the scene, he was smoking. And this is something he did in every single scene in this film. It's very difficult to see him not smoking. And it was part of his character, you know, this deep guy that is smoking all the time. And he was also promoting cigarettes. I love the one on the left. I love to see a man smoke a cigarette. It was cool. Film stars were smoking, and they were promoting it. It's difficult to even imagine a film star today promoting a cigarette, but that's how it was. And that's why it's not a surprise that when the film was released, more than 50% of society was smoking, at least in Europe and North America. How many of you are smoking? Nah, don't be shy. Okay, I see around 3%. I mean, it's impossible. But even if some of you lied, it's because of the shame connected to smoking. You don't want to raise your hand, which shows a great change from the 50%. And that's great that we are reducing the rate of smoking because every year 8 million people are still dying from smoking, out of which 1 million due to secondary smoking. So it's not even their fault and they are dying, which is terrible. So how do we get from more than 50% of society smoking to what we have now? Here is a graph from the UK. The blue is men, the reddish is women, and almost 70% of men were smoking. And then the government and society started to do things. For instance, they banned ads. So you're not allowed to put cigarettes ads anymore. In the 80s, we raised taxes on tobacco products, so less and less people smoked. And finally, in the early 2000s, we got those crazy warnings on the packs, and billboards were banned. So now we are at less than 20% of people smoking, and in this crowd, maybe 5%, which is amazing. And we are solving it, which is great. So that was Humphrey. Now let's go to James Dean. James Dean, you know, right? Like the previous movie star who died from smoking, he got cancer. James Dean also died quite young. Do you know from what? A car accident. And that's terrible. I mean, James Dean was a really big car lover. And when he was very young, in his early 20s, he just had an accident. And it's not only him. Every year we have more than 1 million people dying from car accidents. I would argue that there are many wars right now in the world, but in none of those, so many people are dying. And by the time I will finish this slide, another person will die from a road accident. Every 23 seconds, someone is dying. This is insane. It's over 1,000 people every day. And what are we doing about those accidents? Are we forbidding billboards? No. Are we placing warnings on cars? No. And are movie stars ashamed to be on ads for cars? Also not. Leonardo DiCaprio, again, probably one of the biggest movie stars, is unshamefully promoting a car company. And this very specific car is killing thousands of people every year, so just saying. So this is not a surprise that, unlike cigarettes, the car production is getting higher and higher. And if in the 1950s, when James Dean died from accident, we produced less than 1 million cars every year, today we are close to 100 million cars yearly. We had like a reduction during Corona, but we are way back to the numbers, and we are getting to 100 million. So if we are adding every year almost 100 million cars to the road, it's not a surprise that our streets look like this. And we need to keep building more and more and more roads. And it's not a surprise that Bucharest looks like this. Some people would be looking at this and say, our society finally gets more cars, we have more money, we can buy those shiny machines. But I went yesterday with Nuri, who just left because he started to cry, and we could not even cross the road. Because 80% of the road here outside the festival is given to cars. It is unbelievable. Such a beautiful neighborhood and so much space is given to cars. And they didn't even have the idea that someone will need to go with a cart. So we have a problem, and we're going to think how to solve it. I'm going to go to Churchill. Why did Churchill die? It's getting a sad talk. Age, yeah, he was 91. He got a lot of strokes. He has a really beautiful whiskey. He has a really beautiful saying: "We shape our buildings; thereafter they shape us." I really like it. Probably it's not Churchill because every quote is they say it's Churchill, but right, or Mark Twain. So we shape our buildings; thereafter they shape us. I love it. As an urban planner, I really think it's a beautiful saying. We shape our buildings, then they shape us, and then we change and we shape the building. And the buildings are shaping the people, right? So people are acting differently because the buildings are different. And it's true not only about buildings, it's true about the environment. How we shape our streets, our roads, our neighborhoods, our cities shape the way people act. And it also shapes the culture. I mean, we are affected by it, and our culture is changing. And it changed our dreams, our stories, even our toys. So if our streets look like this, and this is a very real picture from the US, it's not a real surprise that this is how a toy shop looks, especially in the boys section. So boys are growing up dreaming about the car. They're playing with the car, and it looks like a great, like the dream that they need to have in the future. And if you look for a child book, you will see a lot of those car books. It's always about a shiny car that goes really fast. It's really ingrained in our culture, the wish for a nice car. And the famous Playmate, you can buy it in IKEA, but like it's all around. If you look at the streets there, I mean, there are not even sidewalks. The buildings are really boring, and in order to get from one place to another, you have to use a car. But I will not blame the people who created it. This is how very many of our streets look like the picture we saw before from Bucharest. So, yeah, look, I'm an urban planner. I work very often on changing the environment. You know, doing projects that try to remove streets from the road and create more green spaces, more places for people to get together, bike lanes, wider sidewalks. But I come very often to those meetings with residents who just would not agree to make a change. And I think it's because they have a very, very deep, deep wish to keep owning the car. And I think that it has to do a lot with the dreams we were taught, with the stories we were told about the car, and the toys. So I thought, I need to start also changing the toys and not also the environment. Now, you might say, Lior, you're crazy. Like, it's not going to help. But that's how the car industry did it. So when car just arrived to our streets a little bit over 100 years ago, there were no real sidewalks. People walked everywhere. This is a video from Paris, for instance. And the people, when the cars appeared, people just kept walking around. And it was very annoying for the cars because they could not go fast. And a lot of pedestrians, people without a car, were angry because their space was taken. So the car industry, and this is well documented, decided we need to do something. We need to get rid of the people from the roads. Otherwise, we will be stuck. What they did, for instance, in the US, the American Automobile Association started with campaigns. They went to children, they went to schools, they started giving them safety lessons. And in those safety lessons, they were telling them, stay away from traffic. I mean, you need to even walk on the left side of the road so you can look at the cars. So you need to worry from the cars and not them being worried about you. And you, as a little girl with red hair, need to watch from turning cars. It's on you. So they invested a lot of money, and it was really good for the business. And they really changed the story about cars. If you will ask now people why Americans, for instance, really love their cars, you will hear stories about freedom. The Americans saw the car and they thought, this is freedom, we have to have cars. But this is not true. The Americans didn't want the car more than the Europeans wanted a car. There were a lot of money going to that, a lot of ads, a lot of commercials, still paying for Leonardo DiCaprio to promote you to buy a car. So I think we, creative people, can change it. And we need to use our creativity to do it. And I made 2 projects I can share with you, but I think we can do much more. I mean, there are hundreds of people in this festival, and I think we can tell better stories than car industry. So for instance, with the car books, I mean, if you want to buy a child a book about mobility, you will end up with a car book because that's everything we have. I wrote The Car That Wanted to Be a Bike. It's a story about little Johnny, who is really jealous because all the other people in the neighborhood are starting to use a bicycle. And he sees how nice it is to use the bicycle. If you are interested or you're a child, tomorrow I'm going to read it at the festival. So tomorrow at around 3 o'clock I'm going to read it. So that's one project. Or if we look at this carpet, which is just in rooms of millions of children, did you grow up with this carpet? Or is it, yeah, we got some people. You wanted one? Yeah, me too. It was amazing. What if we could create one that shows a better city? And this is a project I did with Bold. We printed one of those carpets at the end. Look, I know it's for many boys, especially boys, unfortunately, it's not as fun because they cannot go as fast. But I think it shows a city that we might want more in the future. And it's just a statement. So, what did I put in this carpet? I put streets that don't have access for cars. This is something we have quite often in the Netherlands. It's streets where cars are allowed, but they are not the master of the road. It's called Woonerf, living street. The UK has them as well. I put another Dutch term, the fietsstraat, the bicycle street. This is a street where at the entrance of the street there is a sign that says cars are allowed, but they are the guests. So they are allowed to drive on the road, but they need to follow the speed of the bicycle. This is very different than this child that needs to worry about the cars. Now the cars need to worry about the child. And I added completely car-free neighborhoods, which is something we start to see all around the world. Neighborhoods that are completely built without access for cars, maybe underground parking. In Utrecht, in the Netherlands, they built a neighborhood for 10,000 people with no cars at all. And I think our future will look like this, and our toys should also look like that. So, as I'm wrapping up, I want to tell you the story of Jane Jacobs. We had this morning a Jane walk, the 30 people that woke up early in the morning, thank you. It was really nice. But I told her the story about this woman who wrote an amazing book about urbanism in the early 60s, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And she was fighting Robert Moses, who was like arguably one of the strongest people in the US. And he basically rebuilt New York, and she was fighting against him with her neighbors, against ruining her neighborhood and building there an expressway. This is the area that we all know today as the Soho. The Soho is still there, so we know that she won. And we know that her neighbors and her were fighting for it. But Jane Jacobs was not an urban planner, she was a journalist. Just like many of you here, you're not urban planners, but you can change Bucharest as well. And I really want to call you to, if you walk on the street and you get stuck, to use your imagination. I think our streets could be much nicer. I mean, it's ridiculous if you look outside and you see all those cars there. And I think we need to stop letting only urban planners like me or the car industry to shape our cities, because we already see where it takes us. So I want to end up with this quote not by Churchill, it's by Jane Jacobs. But you see, Churchill is taking all the quotes. It's unbelievable. So cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lior. That was fantastic. We'll go ahead and bring back the chairs, and we'll discuss more.
Where should I sit?
Wherever you want to sit. Actually, maybe I should sit there to see the time.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, thank you. All right. Okay, so Lior, I love that you're inspired by Jane Jacobs, the walk shop. How many of you went to the walk shop this morning? Anybody here?
Yeah, we have some people. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yes, great. And it's clear that urban planning intersects so deeply with public health and safety, right? And families and the way that we nurture one another, right? And so I'm really curious if you could tell us a little bit more about how you illustrate and convince someone of a vision for a new way of creating a city. I mean, you just showed a slide of Bucharest, right? You had a quick visual of what it could be compared to what it is today. What tools do you use, and how do you sort of tell that story with people?
So normally in my practice, I use a lot of visualizations, like Photoshop, basically. Taking a picture, and I quickly try to show a different way the street could look like, or the neighborhood. That's one. The other side is numbers, because sometimes you need to convince. Traffic engineers, they have the numbers, they have the models. And if you come with a nice story about a playful street, it cannot win against the fight when someone has a number. So you can collect those numbers. There are many examples where if you reduce the amount of cars in a neighborhood, you improve health, you improve economy, and you improve, for instance, the quality of the air, etc. So you can collect those numbers and you can show them as well. So that's to talk to the heart, like with the images, but also to the brain with the numbers.
Talk to the heart, talk to the mind. That's a great praxis element to your work. So I've been wanting to ask you this question for a while. How do you navigate the trade-offs that can occur when you're trying to implement a change in a city? So, for example, in Bucharest, I was talking to someone a couple days ago who lives here, and she was saying we're trying to build a new train, and there's lots of construction and traffic, and it's causing disruption with cars. I live in Seattle in the United States, and so there's so much going on in terms of trying to get a light rail in, and it's causing disruption to businesses and residential areas, and people are upset about it. But then it's also but if we had the train, we would have more freedom of mobility and movement and all of that. So how do you sort of negotiate or sort of navigate those discussions of the trade-offs that have to occur?
Look, very often it feels like a trade-off. For instance, if we will build here a tram, we will need to get rid of of some lanes. So some are winning and some are losing. But this is a fake argument. It's not a situation of some win, some lose. It's a situation of many, many win and a little bit of people lose. Even Bucharest, which is a city with a lot of cars, the majority of people don't have them. The majority of people living in the city don't have cars. 100% of the children don't have cars, but the majority of people don't have them. So if we're building a tram, the same a tram lane, can move so many more people than a car lane. So there is no trade-off, but the discussions are difficult because it feels like it's a trade-off and it feels that you need to balance. But sometimes it's just impossible because our space is limited. You cannot balance, you need to make a choice. And that's why planning is not, it's not a really exact science. It's a political practice.
Absolutely.
And some cities will decide to go with a car, and the majority of people will suffer. And some people will decide to go for public transportation, cycling and walking, and the majority of people will enjoy. That's how it is.
Yeah. I wonder if it's a short-term disruption for a long-term improvement. Is that sort of a way to frame it?
Yeah, and sometimes it's a long-term disruption. Building a metro takes a lot of time and can really kill businesses. Sometimes you really ruin people's lives with those constructions, but we need to remember that in most cities like Seattle, they haven't done it for decades now, and now we are paying for it. Now, it would be very stupid to say, okay, let's not do it now because we will suffer.
It will cost more in the long run.
Yeah, think about the next generations. It sounds nicer than it's maybe in real life, but someone has to suffer a little bit. It's like planting a tree. In the beginning, you don't enjoy it, but in 10 years, it will be really nice. So we just have to go for it.
So we've been talking a lot about prototyping here with different speakers and the way that they create their work. And so I'm super curious if you can recall a project that you started as maybe a temporary project to test or to prototype that eventually became a more large scale. I don't want to say permanent because nothing's really permanent with urban planning, but more permanent than a temporary solution. And if so, how were you able to achieve this?
Nice, yeah. Actually, I'm a person with no patience, which is a real problem for an urban planner because the processes are so long. There are so many rules and regulations. But in recent years, there were the movement of tactical urbanism was becoming quite popular. And tactical urbanism is this idea that we can make really quick changes on the street. And instead of, for instance, building a bike lane, which costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time because you need to go through the entire planning process, you can use tactical urbanism and just paint maybe the bike lane and see if it works or not. And I was lucky enough, I mean, I'm based in Rotterdam. The city of Rotterdam really liked this idea, partly because they wanted to already make a change, and partly because they didn't have so much money to make all the changes. So we've been installing quite a lot of those tactical bike lanes, or just removing parking spaces from the road and replacing them with other facilities like green parking space for bicycles, places to sit. And the nice thing about it is that when residents or shop owners were against, we kept saying, we're just trying, it's only for 2 months. And if it will work, it will stay, and if it will not work, we will just remove it. And it worked, actually. It worked in the sense that in many places it just was nice, because people experienced, they saw it's nice, and they wanted it to continue. And in other places it didn't work, or at least it didn't succeed. But then we just managed to remove it with not so much pain, right? Because you tried, it didn't work. Next time we'll try something else.
So it sounds like a really a powerful way to actually incorporate this into your praxis of testing out what could be for a city.
Yeah, and also for people, I mean, I'm making those photoshops to show people how their city could look like, but there is nothing like experiencing.
Experiencing it, exactly.
How would my street or my neighborhood would feel like without cars? We can wait 30 years to kill the car industry, or we can just close it on one Sunday and see how children enjoy walking on a car-free neighborhood. And it maybe a little bit can change people's perception. It's not going to convince everybody, but it can change.
Yep. Like Barbara said earlier, convictions built with experience. You have to experience it to really see if it makes sense. So what is one action that most of us could embrace in shaping a healthier, safer city that really thinks and cares for our well-being? I think especially when so many of us feel that we don't really have a lot of power or agency to shape our city, or maybe we don't think that we're urban planners or designers.
Yeah.
What's one step we can take?
Okay, so I asked before how many of you smoke, and only a few raised their hands. I wonder if it will be now more or less, but how many of you went to a citizen participation meeting in your neighborhood? So we have the activists.
Oh, there they are, up there.
All the rest not. Now, I've been to many because it's my job. It's terrible. The city goes there many times with a lot of good intentions, and the only people participating are not smiley, nice people. They're angry, grumpy, old people. And then you, as a decision maker, you cannot, or as a planner, you are fighting against a group of people that really don't want, for instance, that you will remove parking. And then the majority silent, which I think many of us agree here that would want more green in our cities, are not participating in this very important part of our democracy. They think I will just vote for the mayor and it will work. But urban planning is a really daily democracy practice. So if you can do something, and I know it's annoying, is to join those meetings and fight for instance, more green spaces. And I mean, it's difficult because the people who go there, they're angry. So, and anger really moves you. But we have to do it. So next time you get this letter from the municipality, don't throw it to the garbage, go to the meeting, fight for it. There are movements around the world, in the US, the IMBY, the Yes in My Backyard movement, to go and fight for building more housing and building more green spaces, and we need to have it in every city.
Urban planning is an everyday political action of democracy. And if you want to, you can go to this group up here if you want to learn more. Maybe build a community, right? Go together. I love that idea.
And we spoke about how difficult it is to get people to be active, because a lot of people take it for granted. But I think, and the nice thing is, a lot of people from City Hall would be happy if there will be more activists.
Absolutely,
because it's people who
they want the support.
Not here, okay.
Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Awesome. All right, well, let's take some audience questions. Who has a question for Lior? Yes. Can we get a mic up here? Start with here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, hi. I have a question. I'm noticing how in a city I sometimes go to, Brussels, these pots of plants are showing up on the very tiny streets where there are barely some places to park, and there are these pots of plants just taking away a parking space, and nothing's given back. So I like it very much. I have more bicycle lanes, green spaces, but then people with the car that had the car until then, what are they supposed to do? And because nothing's given back to them, maybe they receive some kind of subsidy to buy a bike, but then get rid of your car, and how do I carry my children to the school on the other side of the city? Do you plan when you take away a space from the cars to give something back? Do you work together in your experience with the authorities to do this in consultation? Thanks.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So it's a very good question because it's difficult, right? You are taking something from someone. You're taking a car parking space. What do those people get back? But we need to remember we had the talk today, and we were 30 people, and we all were fitting on one car space. I mean, in a city like Brussels, only 20% of people or so have a car. And I know it's really hard and difficult when the city takes parking space from you, but we cannot give to those people again and again back. But we need to offer them an alternative. And this is what, I mean, some cities do well, maybe Brussels not, although Brussels is active with building more bike lanes, is to show people how they could move otherwise. And for that, you need alternative, for instance, good public transportation. So in Rotterdam, for instance, we were participating in this experiment where you take parking spaces, but you give people a possibility to get a bike, but also a card for public transportation, and also information of how to move around. It will never be perfect, and it will never be as convenient as the car. Another option is to offer parking spaces outside of the city, where you could leave your car if you really need it, but in the city you will have less. But I refuse to try to always, and I know that this is not your suggestion, but I refuse to try to always make the car owners comfortable, because they are at the end a minority. So for me, we need to work with everybody, but there is so many more people that are suffering every day, and their suffering is much bigger than the difficulty to find a parking spot. But alternatives are extremely important, I agree.
No, I'm talking mostly about public transport to give back, but I feel that it's different people taking away the parking space, not talking to the ones giving more transport.
I agree, and that's the problem with cities, municipalities. They are huge. One department is doing one thing, the other department is doing something completely else, and it's not always synced. But one day.
Thanks.
All right, we have a question over here.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much. You came up with the smoking example. So I grew up in a generation that stopped smoking, but actually the current generation is doing something quite similar. And I just checked, and Philip Morris last month was at a record share price. So it's not because they're planting trees, it's because people are vaping and so on. So how do you see that? I mean, the car industry has now reinvented itself as an EV industry, but in the end, that doesn't address any of the problems that you mentioned about being able to walk the pram of your baby at all. So isn't it the case that the innovation is always stronger? I see it a bit like doping in sports, that we can cut something, but then the next generation is not doing EPO. They're doing something much more advanced, and we're always behind the curve.
Great question.
Yeah, thanks. We are in a big problem because when large industries feel at risk. They have a lot of money and brain power to find a way through regulations. But the thing about what is really nice about cities is that it touches all of us. And we are, again, the people who don't own a car, again, we are the majority. And we cannot let a small minority win. But it's going to be difficult. Because whenever a city tries to make a change, a lot of anger is coming. I don't know if you followed what Paris, the mayor is getting death threats literally death threats. The UK conspiracy theories about the 15-minute cities. They call it ghettos, where I don't know, the elite tries to put cities in small ghettos. Those stories are coming from somewhere. And it's just going to keep going. I don't have an answer for it, just that we cannot let it go, because our cities are getting worse and worse. If we let it go, we need to just fight back. And I'm sorry that it sounds very, fight, but we have to, because otherwise our streets will just be parking lots.
What makes you have resilience to keep that fight going? Because it is difficult, right? And it can be exhausting, right?
Yeah, but it's true, but I think it's important. There are people doing much more important jobs in the world. I think it's nice. I have, every now and then, successful projects, a playground is opening, a parking space is removed, and a tree is planted. It's nice. So,
small wins.
Yeah, small wins.
Yeah.
Alone, it will not solve the problem, but
you have to celebrate something, right?
Yeah.
You have to celebrate the progress that comes. All right, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Let's get this woman at the top here. We haven't taken a question from this side.
it's a lot to walk. We need a car.
Hi, thank you for your inspirational talk. I think that research suggests that it's really complicated to take a solution from context, like a country which has its own culture, its own factors, and then try to replicate it to another country because of these factors, like historical, political, social. It's not really working to do this kind of replication. So I was wondering if you can tell us a bit about the historical and political context in the Netherlands when you transitioned from cars and became such a culture focused on cycling, and if there are any parallels that we can learn in Romania from that?
Yeah, so the second part is that the Netherlands in the 70s, two things happened. One, there was the oil crisis. Basically, countries were not selling the Netherlands oil anymore, so they had to cut their oil consumption and introduce car-free Sundays. That was one thing. The other thing is that a lot of Dutch cities were preserved after the war. So unlike happened in Central Eastern Europe, where many cities were completely ruined and rebuilt, the Netherlands was Amsterdam. It still stayed nice and cozy. And people were just angry that streets are being ruined to introduce cars. So that was the context, and in that case, just by mistake, because of the oil crisis and because of a group of activists, led, by the way, by mothers to children, who were complaining about kids are being killed by cars. The movement was called Stop the Children Murder. It succeeded. But I just want to say that it's very, we can always say, Romania is different than the Netherlands. Here people really, for instance, need the car, or here it will be difficult to convince because of the different economy or different political system. But that's not, it's true, but we need still to remember that we're all humans. We're very, very similar to each other in both countries. We all get killed by a car if it hits us, and we all very much enjoy streets that are with trees, with space to walk, where the pace of moving around is slower. So it's true that the process to get there is different, and it's a political process, but the need here or in the Netherlands is very much similar, in my opinion. And you just see it. Where do Romanian people go for holiday? They go to the Paris of the world, right? Because it's really beautiful. And they go to Barcelona. And yeah.
Well, I'm really inspired by your work, Lior, and
Thanks.
I would love to invite you to the United States at some point because we need some help in terms of getting our cities to a place of, well-being and safety. So, but thank you so much for giving a talk here at Unfinished.
Thank you very much.